friends, it's Therese and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be me talking about my thoughts on These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is a spoiler-free review, so if you guys haven't read the book yet, you guys will be fine. But if you guys like this video, hit like, subscribe, comment on your thoughts on the book, or if you guys will read it in the future. And let's get into it. So full disclosure, I have no notes on this book. I meant to do notes on it last night and I forgot. And then I meant to do notes on it before I filmed, and then my hair decided it didn't want to refresh properly. So I had to do a very long process of trying to figure out what my hair needed. It needed more gel. But let's just kind of get into the video before I start rambling even more. So for These Violent Delights, this is a YA retelling of Romeo and Juliet set in 1926 Shanghai, where we get to see the two rivaling gangs, the Sais and the Montagovs, the Sais being the Chinese gang who has been ruling the Shanghai area for the better part of a few decades. And then the Montagovs, who is kind of a newer gang from Russia who has come in and has their own territory and is established on their own, but has a blood feud going on with the Sais. The Sais are called the Scarlet Gang and the Montagovs are called the White Flowers. Our main character, Juliet, has returned to Shanghai after spending a few years abroad after being betrayed by her first love, Roma. And they are brought back together when an implied madness/illness sweeps across the country and causes people to not only go mad but to rip out their own throats in the process. Like I said, this is YA. It's a little bit darker, has a bit more, I would say, blood and gore to it, so the trigger warnings. There is an implied pandemic. I was not prepared when I went into this book that they would be discussing the madness as a form of pandemic. So as we are currently in the middle of a pandemic right now, if you guys are a little bit allergic to words such as quarantine, vaccine, illness, I completely understand, and I would be very wary because I did not know that was a thing in this book until they mentioned the word vaccine, and I had to sit there for a good 5 minutes no. Another trigger warning you have to keep in mind is that there is a lot of death, blood, and gore in this. We get to see some pretty interesting depictions on how the victims have committed suicide in a sense, but not really suicide. There is implications of almost like colonization or imperialism, where we have a lot of Brits coming in to this very eastern sect and trying to take over in a sense with their own kind of methods. There is also an implied opioid crisis going on because of that said imperialism that has come over. Just a heads up for all of y'all who are in there. What else? There is violence, lots of fight scenes, murder. There is also a flashback to a bombing that occurs and an assassination. I think that's all the content / trigger warnings that I can do that aren't heavy in spoilers, just because it involves gangs. I feel like that's kind of given that there's gonna be murder, blood, death, gore, assassinations. Yeah. Moving on to my first thoughts of the book, I was super excited when this book was announced. I love me a good Romeo and Juliet retelling, especially when that is spun around a non-Western kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? A non-Western viewpoint. We get to see them transformed and taken into China during the 1920s, which is a completely different beast from America in the 1920s, as you can possibly imagine. We also get to see a reimagining of all of our beloved characters, such as Benvolio, Mercutio, Tybalt, all of those fun things that kind of made Romeo and Juliet kind of the literary thing that it is now. I also really enjoyed the spin on the original Romeo and Juliet retelling. It's kind of a slow process as to what exactly happened between Roma and Juliet before the events of this book, but you can kind of imply it. I think it's also said in the synopsis. Roma Montagov, who was Juliet's first love until he betrayed her. So you can tell that there is some history there, and there's a lot of hurt and pain behind this relationship, but also a lot of hope and kind of love. And I was really excited to read that, but I was a little hesitant just because there was a lot of hype from booktube with this, and sometimes it's a double-edged sword. Either the hype goes well and you enjoy it, or it kind of goes and you don't find that it's your cup of tea despite everyone's loving it the way that you would hope just you did. Let's go with the things that I did not like. First of all, one thing that I wasn't the biggest fan of with this book is that there was no urgency. we see that their relationships are developing. We're seeing a lot more of like what's going on between all the characters and their backstories, which is great, which is a good setup for the second book, How These Violet Ends. However, my biggest issue is that there was no urgency. We're seeing kind of, not so much a pandemic, but like a problem, a mystical kind of scientific problem, where people are literally driven to madness and rip out their own throats in the most violent way, and it is contagious. However, the problem that we're having is the problem that I had was that there was no urgency. We see all these characters take their time to figure out what happened, even after the events are progressively getting worse and worse. It's a little hard for me to be like, oh yeah, how bad is this kind of like madness hitting other people if our main characters have the time to take the time with this novel. So I felt like it was just a little bit like slower pace in terms of trying to figure that out. There wasn't a lot of urgency even when we hit kind of the rising action of the book, which I can't spoil. It felt like there was still just no urgency with them trying to figure out exactly what happened. They were more than willing to just kind of like go through the monotonous portions of it, and even if it took them more time to figure out what had happened, there was no sense of panic coming from any of the characters. It was just like, oh yeah, we'll figure it out when we figure it out. And it was like, okay, people are dying. Your own people are dying. And you're not, okay, that's on you. Moving on to the things that I did enjoy, I really liked how this book took the spin on Romeo and Juliet. I love the non-Western background and to see how that affects these characters and how they view the world and how the world has kind of placed their views of what they think of the people onto them. I loved the relationships between it. I love the relationships between Rosalind and Kathleen and Juliet, and I loved Benedict and Marshall's budding relationship and friendship. I love kind of that bickering back and forth, like I have to take care of you but you kind of don't. I also just loved how soft Romeo is. I feel like we don't get a lot of Romeo's characterization and a lot of, like, Romeo's character, I feel like in retellings or just in the original play, to me always felt kind of flat. But what I liked about this one is that he's a very soft person. He doesn't necessarily want to be the heir, but he knows he is the best chance at this gang's ability to move forward and become better than what they were if he were to become the heir. I also love the dynamic between Juliet and Roma with the whole grumpy meets soft sunshine and a lot of the angst that came from Roma's betrayal and potentially something Juliet did that led to a very traumatic loss in Roma's life. I love the prose. I thought that the prose and descriptions were absolutely wonderful, and I loved how Chloe Gong described Shanghai in the 1920s and just kind of the culture that we don't really get to see, because when we think 1920s, a lot of our brains, or at least the Western, like America's brains, tends to go to 1920s New York and the flappers and all the stuff, but there are other cultures outside of that have seen the 1920s kind of boom and that industrialization and the glamorization of that. So I really like seeing that aspect as on a more Eastern aspect, and to see how the West heavily impacted and, like, I don't want to say traumatized, but traumatized the East in the process. Overall, I really enjoyed this book and I can't wait for the sequel. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. Again, I feel like the lack of urgency in the entire novel kind of took away from the enjoyment, because I was just kind of like reading nothing but angst, which isn't a bad thing. I love paranormal romance, y'all know this, I love my angst, but I feel like since a lot of the plot is based heavily around this potential pandemic slash madness slash illness running rampant through the country, I feel like it would have made more sense to make them feel like they are a little bit more urgent, like they need to rush this process, but I feel like it just wasn't there, which is what took it away. But I cannot wait for the second book. I believe it's already out, if it's not out already. Editing, Therese, can you throw up the release date right here? Thanks. I highly recommend this, and I highly recommend Chloe Gong as an author. If you guys don't feel like picking up Romeo and Juliet retelling, I would definitely put her on your radar for her other novels that I'm sure she has in the works. Love this. Recommend it. Definitely going to be a favorite of the year. Probably like lower 10 than higher, but definitely a favorite of the year. But that is it on my thoughts, spoiler-free thoughts, on These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. If you guys like this video, please feel free to subscribe like I said in the beginning, or let me know your thoughts on the book down below, or if I somehow convinced you to read said book. But until next time, hopefully you guys are having a wonderful week, and if not, hopefully your week gets better for you. And I'll talk to y'all in my next video, which is going to be a little fun, because if you guys follow me on Goodreads, you know what I'm currently reading. But yeah, bye!